was researching for rest, it just kept reappearing because the same person who I quoted had to draw his conclusion and saying that, sleep isn't a detriment, that it's, built into that evolutionary model. So the process of natural selection did not eliminate sleep because it is a mechanism that organisms use to adapt to a particular environment, which makes them better suited for the challenges Mother Nature has in store for them. While evolution acknowledges the necessity of sleep, it once again falls into the trap of advocating an intelligent design. It seems actually quite genius that humans have evolved to sleep, because what? If you don't sleep and you go with prolonged periods of sleep deprivation, you can actually die. Mm-hmm. So you see how it's what? Intrinsically built in to how we were designed, that we need sleep, but yet we're calling nature a mother. And I was coming from the aspect that we usually think of mothers as caring and nurturing, and when you look at it in the framework of sleep, how caring and nurturing is it for what Mother Nature to allow her children to sleep, because it's what? A huge necessity to us. But again, it would advocate that nature has some kind of intelligence, because it would allow us to do that. And not only some kind of intelligence, how generous it is for what? Nature to evolve us in such a way where we need sleep. Just imagine having to work all the time. You were just talking about how much you need your sleep. And it's like, could you imagine having to stay up 24/7? Like, I don't think anyone can imagine doing that. We need our sleep. And even as you get older, like before I started this, I had to take a little nap, So it's like, you cherish those moments of sleep, especially when you have a kid, because they're so exhausting and tiring that you need your opportunities to sleep. And it's like, if we're looking at this from an evolutionary worldview, how thankful should you be to it? So once again, that evolutionary worldview, number one, advocates some kind of intelligence, and this is even people who don't believe in God personifying nature. And so, a mother would have intelligence, a person would have intelligence. But not only that, it's just showing a huge care that what nature even has for us. And again, it's like, we're going to ascribe that to something impersonal. Mm-hmm. And then I forgot what I was going to go with that, but I had where I was going to go with that. Being thankful. That's what I was going to highlight, that we should be thankful that we have the opportunity to sleep. But I would offer some pushback, because why are we being thankful to nature? Nature didn't do anything. But if you look at things from a biblical worldview, you have a person who is an intelligent being who does care about us, and who we ought to be thankful to. And when we read scripture, it's like in the first book of the Bible, we see this idea, this concept of rest. The Bible describes an intelligent designer who designed humans in such a way that they need rest. The first time rest is mentioned in Genesis, scripture says, on the seventh day, God finished his work that he had done, and rested on the seventh day from all his work that he had done. And it's like, when you read this account, you're like, why does God even create, things in 6 days and then rest on the seventh? Like, what is the point of that? If we believe in this omnipotent God who can just do what he wants and just speak things into existence, like, why doesn't he just, do it in one day? Like, what's the purpose of drawing this out for a week? I don't know if you ever thought about that. Like, what is the point of him doing that?
Yeah, no, I never thought about that. It's just the way that it was.
And I would say that it was done to teach us this idea of rest. God is not, because I guess people would say, well, when we think of God resting, that he was tired. And no, it wasn't that he was tired. He was doing it for our benefit. This verse is saying, or is teaching a universal truth. God resting on the seventh day of creation is God's way of telling humanity that they're limited. God does not have limitations, but God does. God is so amazing that he creates us with limitations, but he does not rub his superiority in our face. God is no oppressor. Rather, he is a liberator. And so in, doing that, creating the world in 6 days and then resting on the seventh, it was done to be a reflection of him. that we are to work and then rest on the seventh. We're made in his image, and so what? We're reflecting what he does. But even resting on the seventh day is him teaching a very important truth, that what? You're limited, and it's like we can't argue with that because we can't work for 7 days, and God designed it in such a way, or we can't work all the time. He designed it in such a way that he does allow us to rest. And then let me see. God isn't limited. He's capable of working all the time, and just physical and mentally, we are incapable of this. And so, how did I want to go from here? Like, again, just harping on that fact that we're incapable of working, but God is. But when we talk about God working, it's not the same as man working. So when we talk about work from God's vantage point, when Scripture talks about that, what is it primarily referencing when it talks about God not ceasing to work? What do you think that's in relation to?
I think about that as him always being there and watching and listening and being involved in our lives. There's not a point where he takes a break and leaves us to our own devices. I think that, and I think that that's where we can find comfort in knowing that even though we're finite, even though we're limited and we need rest, we need breaks, we can't go 24/7, God has it. God's got all the time, he's got all the strength, and he doesn't need to stop and take a break because this is too much for him.
No, I think that's a good point. And when I was thinking about that, I had this Hebrews 1:3 verse in mind, where it says, God upholds the universe by the word of his power. And these are just things that you could just observe in nature. When it talks about God upholding the universe, it's like when we go to sleep, does everything stop?
Right.
The universe continues to continue on. And it's saying that God is sovereign over that he doesn't stop working. He's the one who is upholding the universe. So God's work is completely different. I said, most people can't even hold up their body weight, but yet God upholds the universe. So he's continuing to work even when we are resting. And just the grace in that when we just look at the universe and just see how we just have absolutely no involvement in keeping things together, that he creates us in a way where we don't have to worry about sustaining the sun or the universe or any of these things, that he's the one who does that. He doesn't take a day off. Just imagine, like we can just go to sleep and just know that, hey, the sun is going to rise. We don't have any control over that, but Scripture tells us that it's God who has control over that. God is the one who orders and governs the universe. Therefore, he's the one who deserves all the honor and the thanks. And not even just when we talk about God working just as the creator, but we just see him working throughout history. There wasn't a big bang. God simply, spoke things into existence. And though most, deny a literal 6-day creation, I would say that the seventh day is the most significant, and it had the most significant to the people of Israel. I don't know if too many people are familiar with, what Israel celebrated, the Sabbath day. And this was a day where they were to cease from working, that they weren't supposed to do anything. I shouldn't say anything. There was a specific list of things that they weren't supposed to do. Like, it's kind of like our Sunday or our weekend where we just don't work. That, and just, although I should have looked this up, just seeing how other cultures do it, not just American culture, but just in other places where if there's just that day of rest or even that weekend where people just, work 4 or 5 days or however long their schedule is, but there's always a day of rest that's set aside. And it's like, even if you're not a believer, you don't come from a biblical worldview, it just seems like that's intrinsic in human nature, where we just have that day of rest. But for Israel, and specifically, that day of rest was the Sabbath, where they weren't supposed to work. And when you look at Scripture, there was certain commands that they weren't to do, and if they broke that command, it says in Exodus 31:16 through 17, I'm not going to read that whole verse, but it says, whoever does any work on the Sabbath day shall be put to death. And now most people who read scripture, they always think it's like old and outdated, and like how could you even subscribe to this when it teaches these archaic rules. But what are your thoughts on why would God decree such a harsh punishment for those who worked on the Sabbath?
I think if the Sabbath was truly a day to rest and reflect, and also to, I guess, remind us of our own fragility, that we need rest. So I guess really you could kind of spin it and say that refusing to adhere to the rules of the Sabbath is more of a decree of independence. And just saying that, well, I understand you think that I need rest, but I got this, reliance on myself type deal. And I think that's kind of a smack in the face of the God who created us to worship him, yes, but also to rely on him and to draw from his strength. So I would think that that's linked to it somehow.
Yeah, and that's exactly the point. Like, we look at a rule like that and we're like, why is it so severe? Even in the garden where God says, don't eat the fruit from the tree and what the penalty is death. We look at it as, man, that seems like overkill. It seems unnecessary. It doesn't seem that significant. Number one, God is holy, and so breaking any of his laws would result in death. But specifically when it came to the Sabbath, you hit it right on the head, that the Sabbath, again, was our reminder that physically and mentally we are incapable of working all hours of the day. We were created to work and then rest from our work,